I just restarted. Okay. Okay, good. Wonderful. All right. Yes. All right, wonderful. Hey. This is adding. You do see it, right, Gerald?
I'm here.
Ah, wonderful. Yes. Beautiful. All right. So give me 2 seconds to get some housekeeping out of the way. I'm supposed to be sharing this link to the Barbados Museum and Historical Society, as well as African Heritage.com. Let me share now link. And I hope Chad and Kathy come back. Okay. No, I click on that. Okay. Come on now. Technology. How you doing?
I'm great. The funny thing is, I don't know if you can see me though. Can you see me?
Yeah, I see you just fine.
But I don't see. I'm looking at your stream, but I don't see you there. So
Oh, okay.
either way, as long as you can see me, then that's fine.
Yeah. All right. Well, let me just send a message to everybody. Okay, I see what happened here. This is my first time ever doing this, so you must forgive me.
I had the same problem last weekend. Trust me, I know.
Oh my word. To be. All right, let me send it to Paul. All right. Boom. And then one more person. K. Okay. All right. And boom. Sent. All right. So, okay. So who's online? Let's see. All right. Thank you, everyone. Hey, Kavir. I haven't seen you in a long time. All right. So, hello, Tyrone. Okay, let me stay over here because I see the camera. I like to cut it in half. So I have. Oh, move over some more, Gerald. I got half of your face. There you go. So stay in that a little bit
Okay,
more.
I see. I see it. Perfect. Perfect.
All right. Now I'm gonna be so real. I tend to get nervous when I do these things. And when I get nervous, I forget everything. And I know. So I'm going to start with Gerald Barclay. You're a descendant of Arthur Barclay, who is
Mhm.
like okay, who was the 15th president of Liberia, correct?
Indeed.
All right. So tell us exactly how are you related? I know you're a grandson, but which number? Are you third, fourth, fifth, sixth? Which one?
Well, it was my father's grandfather, so I guess it was a great grandfather.
So okay, so Arthur Barclay was your great grandfather.
Yes.
Wow, that's so cool. All right, that's so cool. And where are you located now? Everyone wants to know if you're in Liberia, if you're in America, where are you? Switzerland?
I actually no, I actually live in Atlanta, but I grew up in New York City for
Mm-hmm.
many years.
Okay. All right. And you have a very interesting life. Actually, we both share a life in the music industry. Although I took the record company side, you took the video production side.
Oh, indeed.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Let me know if this is framed off a little bit too much for you, because my phone keeps sliding. I wanted to do it on my desktop, but it didn't work. So,
Okay. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about that. Tell us a little bit about your you being a producer, director, before we get into the history.
well, I grew up in the 80s in Staten Island, New York. It was a huge Liberian community, and I managed to team up with the Wu-Tang Clan when they were just about to get started in '93. But prior to that, I had worked on several movies just to try to get my feet work. I worked on a Spike Lee movie, and before that, I worked on a movie called King of New York. And I was able to then kind of focus a little bit on what I wanted to do, which was at the time, music videos was the best way to get into the industry because hip hop, embraced a lot of hip hop filmmakers.
It's true. It's true. So, at what point in your life did you realize that you were the great grandson, that you came for such, I would say, royalty? How did you realize? What age did you realize that your family were politically affiliated with, um, you know, with Liberia?
Well, I'll say this. I mean, they are growing up, I was a lot more aware of it. When you come to the United States, you kind of blend in a lot more, but in Liberia, the Barclay name went far because you would go places and, it's part of the history. And also it was part of sort of our everyday being. My grandmother made sure she kept us in tune with that culture of the American Liberians that sort of was the ruling class. So as after the coup, we came to the United States, and basically we became regular people in the United States, so it worked out very well for us to kind of just be normal people. And the fact that I chose my profession sort of brought me back into the spotlight again, but it wasn't because of family influence and those type of things. So I got a chance to grow up as a regular American kid dealing with issues in the United States. So I'm very much aware of all of the good and bad of being an American citizen. The coup happened when I was 12 years old. So in 1980, just devastated everything. And if anything, you made sure that you hid your connection to those Americo-Liberian heritage because it could get you killed. So my people got us in this country. I actually had to change our names to come to this country because of what was happening back then. And as time went on, like I said, we became very American. So, and it really worked out because, like I said, I was able to pick up and just be a normal person.
Okay, all right. So when did you realize that you had family in Barbados?
What was funny? I think it was 1990 or 91. I came across a piece of document that really, it was the life sketch. I don't know if I shared that with you a while back, but it was a life sketch for Sarah and Barclay. And basically, it broke it down about, her leaving Barbados and coming to the United States with her father and I think 11 other siblings. It's been a while, and we were able to catch up on the history, and it worked out very well because I was able to really just see the connection between the Barclays and how they, at that time, for this guy to be able to pack up all 11 of his kids and put them on a ship and then travel to to Liberia seeking freedom, it was what really impressed me. And someday I may end up touching on that story. I think it's a fascinating story.
It is.
And
So,
and then I learned about the other family, like the Goodridges and the Padmores that were on the same ship. Then I realized that the connection that they all had, and I see the closeness because I grew up around people calling me cuz, and I didn't understand what it was until reading that document and then learning a lot more about Liberian culture and the difference between the Americo-Liberians and the indigenous. And I felt a little bit more connected with a longer history as opposed to just growing up in Staten Island and that's it.
Well, so anyone who's related to the Skeets, Austins, Devonish, Wales, I don't know how to pronounce this. If it's pronounced Wales or another pronunciation, Duggan, Padmores, Nelson, Marshall, Worrell, Earl, Gibson, Denny, Pollard, Bignell, Douglas, Kings, Thorpe, Hunt, Darrell, Eastman, Holder, Jackmans, the Cox, Browns, Hines, the Cadell, the Bournes, the Broon, um, Innes, Tull, Blackett, Applewhite, Weeks, Brathwaite, Adamson, Goodrich, like you mentioned,
Right.
Francis, Joan, Highland, that makes me think of Tracy Highland, Taylor, Clarks, which are my family as well, Thome, Port, Graves, McLean, Forbes, Daldrin, the Collier, Gale, Alleens, Campbell, Williams, Blackman, Wharton, Moores, the Briggs, Simmons, Murray, Lanes, the nurses, Jordan, Gittins, which also are my family, Ward, and Armstrong. Those are the surnames of the people who were on the Cora ship that left Barbados
Oh,
in,
wow.
yes, on the 6th of April, 1865. That's half the island of Barbados right there. That is so half the island. It's crazy. So excuse me.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's like it seemed like everyone left. For some reason, I forgot the port and all the other family members that left. That's crazy.
I
And
know.
and it was funny, just reading about what was happening in the world at that time. You had black people who were educated and just needed freedom.
Hmm.
And I
Yeah.
apologize if I'm eating. I'm very hungry. I was shooting all day, and
Mm,
I just ordered food. So,
no
I'm
problem.
probably one of the few Liberians that eat sushi.
And forgive me and my allergies. I just returned back to New York a couple of weeks, and I've been sneezing and coughing like crazy. So I've yet to
So,
get accustomed to the atmosphere yet. So basically, it was Anthony Barclay who would have been your great great grandfather, along with London Bourne and Samuel Jackman Prescott, who were the ones who were in charge of the Back to Africa movement from Barbados. I understand the conditions in Barbados during the 1860s were horrible. I mean, you had a lot of poor people. People were dying of malnutrition. There were hardly any jobs. The majority of the land was used for agriculture, for export. So you had a lot of black people who were really suffering. Also, at that time, you had a good number of Barbadians who were migrating to other Caribbean countries, such as Jamaica, St. Lucia, for other opportunities. So I understand the first the Back to Africa movement started in 1815 with a guy named Paul Cuffey in America. He uh, he was a businessman as well as a seaman, and he took back 38 Black Americans, free blacks, to Sierra Leone at first. And then
right.
the ACS, who is the American Colonization Society, they are the ones who basically funded from there on the Back to Africa movement. And actually, they're the ones who gave the grant of 10,000 to Anthony Barclay, which would be your great, 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 great grandfather. He was born in 1810. That's all I can tell you. He was also born a slave. I don't know when he got emancipated, or yeah, I don't know when he got emancipated, but all I know by the mid 1800s, he was advocating for the rights of brown people in Barbados, such as the Brown Privilege Bill, so they can testify against whites. His father was an abolitionist and also a civil rights, well, civil activist. And so he comes from a he comes from a family full of activism. Also, they owned a store in Bridgetown, right? He was a shopkeeper. And Anthony Barclay, he married Sarah Ann Bourne. Sarah Ann Bourne is the daughter of London Bourne. And London Bourne, for all those who don't know, was one of the richest men in Barbados at that time, and he was black. Okay. Even London Bourne himself was born a slave, and his father sold him. His father sold his two sons. There was four of them, but sold two sons who were still in slavery to a Jewish guy, and he was able to get them manumitted in England, and that's how they got their manumission. But
Oh, wow.
along with Samuel Jackman Prescott, who's also a very noted civil rights leader, he's also on the bill in the money one of the bills in Barbados. I can't remember who. Okay, Fernando says, "Good luck with all the success on the new film. Have a bad connection. Have to bounce. Talk to you soon." So just
No
letting you know.
problem.
Yeah.
No problem. I actually got to go back to that page where I can read the comments.
Okay. So yeah, so along with those three, London-born and Anthony Barclay, they actually started a number of organizations to advocate for middle class, especially middle class Barbadians of good stature, in terms of good character, to go to Liberia. And I understand on the boat originally there were 333, but by the time the boat docked, it was 346 that got off the boat. But
Interesting.
yeah, so, but ironically, they were supposed to leave December of 1864, but something happened where they weren't able to. Also, I think around that time, I remember reading the good number of people were feeling discouraged because they were trying for years, trying to get some type
Mhm.
of transportation system to come to Liberia. And so, but finally, by the 25th of March, 1864, is when, no, 65 is when the chorus ship came to Barbados. And actually, they sailed on April 5th, but due to the governor wanting to do quote unquote safety checks, I say quote unquote because anything governors and black people, I tend to always question it. But they wanted to make sure they
Right.
had enough provisions make sure they had enough provisions on the boat so this way they got there safely. But 34 days later, no one died along the way, but we have lost a lot of people once they landed in Liberia too.
Yes, that's one of the things that happened once they got there. The malaria, it actually conflicts with other natives. There's a excellent book called Slaves No More, Letters from Liberia,
Mm-hmm.
that just brings you directly into, what they encountered at the time. And I felt like, wow. It's
Yes.
funny, I rented that book from the library maybe over 14 years ago, and I never brought it back. That was a crazy thing. But
Mm-hmm.
it's a fascinating book that deals with the hardship that they had to go through. And some of the things I want to talk to you about is what the feeling was, because there's a sense of abandonment I felt. The ACS, of course, they funded the trip, but there was a point where they just pulled their funding and these people were stranded. I don't know if it was a trick used to get rid of the people who may have been radicals,
Mm-hmm.
or when word got back that people were dying, that they stopped and like, oh, you know what, maybe we'll rethink this going back to Africa thing.
Well, I
So it
don't
was
know.
definitely
But I do know that the agenda behind it, from what I've read, it was very racist in the beginning. It was really truly to get rid of the free blacks in America, primarily to get them away because they felt that their thought process was that blacks could not. No, I wrote this down because I actually wanted to actually quote their words that I saw on a
hmm
document, and it was just absolutely horrendous. Oh yeah, they believed that blacks could not exist in the U.S. as a citizen as equals.
hmm,
But if you realize that's still happening to this day, that ain't nothing new. You
right.
know, they, so, but even so, if you think about the economic force of it too, when you have free blacks, you also have, a competing force economically wise. So, but in terms of them pulling funding, I don't know anything about that. I don't know about that. So I'll definitely look into
Yeah,
that.
the ACS was defunded. It was part of, I forgot where the article was, but um, you heard about, I mean, you talked about Paul Cuffey. That was one of the problems, because I was literally just in um, Battery Park a couple of days ago. And when in going through there, I realized that that was where they embarked from. And I remember people
Mm-hmm.
showing up to leave, and then there was no money to pay for the boat.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just grabbing from memory here, but I know it was hardship because they showed up intending to go to Liberia, and there was no funding. And that's
That's
what Paul Cuffey
mhm.
was dealing with back then. So
But
um,
that's the same thing that
I,
happened in Liberia. The Barbadians, they were asking for funding from the government in Liberia, and because of the wars that was happening, the civil wars, they didn't really, period, they didn't have the funding anyway to send a boat to from Barbados, so Liberia to Barbados and back to Liberia. So
you're
they
right,
had
because I
to
was
reach
in the
out.
midst of the Civil War. Wow.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But no, actually, the midst of the civil war in both places, if you think about it, the civil war in terms of Liberia with the Gula, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but there
The
was,
Gola,
yeah,
the
Gola.
Gola War.
Yes, and then also you had the civil rights, not civil rights. You had the civil American civil wars here in 1860s. So that could also be well, in terms of no, coffee was in 1815, so that wouldn't have been an issue.
Yeah, that
Very
was at the inception of the government.
But also, one thing I do want to highlight also is that there was a number of insurrections and revolts that happened in the 1700s and 1800s. I think is one of the reasons why the ACS really wanted to get people, free blacks, from whether it's the Caribbean islands and the Americas. Because if you think about it, you had I might be pronouncing it wrong, but the Akumu slave revolts in St. John in 1733, the Stono
Hmm.
Rebellion in 1739. That's in America, the New York Conspiracy in 1741, and not to name Suriname, they had a number of insurrections from 1757 to 1772. Don't forget the successful Haitian Revolution in 1791, and don't forget Buster Rebellion in Barbados in 1816. So I think all these, and there's much more. There's a plethora of various insurrections and
Right.
rebellions that were happening. And I think they were also very scared. I think that's one of the reasons why the ACS also really came into fruition. You know.
Yeah, that's what I'm
Um,
saying. Like, I mean, this was a couple of years ago when I read the article. It seemed to position the ACS as people didn't trust them.
mm,
And, the consensus was, why are they trying to get rid of these people? So there was some sort of distrust for them. And the fact that they pulled the funding
mhm.
once they got over there, I think it could have been a conspiracy to get rid of the troublemakers.
Now, growing up, what did you hear about Arthur Barclay? Did you hear anything much about the Barclay family and what you guys, what offices you held? The many offices you guys held? Oh my goodness.
Well, I
Not
know,
just,
one thing I was proud of is once they landed, they became very productive and
yes.
part of the community, and they were able to help structure governments. I know that they were not greedy. I know that just based on talking to my uncles, and because I grew up mostly around my mother's family, which were the Gibsons. You just brought that up. So they too also were from Barbados,
Mm,
but um, they were very, very smart people and continue to just contribute all the way up until the Civil War. Because our oldest matriarch is in her 90s now. It's my father's mother. My
And when you say
grandfather
Civil
passed
War,
away.
when you say Civil War, just for those watching, what year and what Civil
The
War you?
Liberian Civil War.
Okay.
Yeah, the Liberian Civil War. So let me ask you this question. What was the consensus of the people that stayed in Barbados and looked at the ones that went into Liberia? Because if you stayed in Barbados, you stayed and maintained your Bajan culture. But when you went to Liberia, it sort of got sucked into this sort of melting pot of
Mm.
Congolese, people from many other countries that went. You had Jamaicans that went there. You had obviously a lot of African Americans. So what was the consensus of the Bajans, people that stayed in Barbados, about the ones that left?
Mm. I really don't know much at that particular time, but I do know the few letters I've seen that were written back. It was more concern, making sure that everyone was okay, um, and just trying to find out how life was in Africa, in Liberia. I've seen some letters that were written back about that everyone was fine and everyone was well, and basically some had passed away and some had definitely what's the word, assimilated well into the culture
Right.
and into the country. Um, and one of the things that actually struck me, that was fascinating me, is the fact that Arthur Barclay was a salt seller in his teens. When he
And
got
most
to
of them
like,
had to do that.
yeah, when he
That's
got to
true.
Liberia, he was a salt seller. He started as a salt seller and became president.
But you know that salt was one of the most valuable items at that time?
Yes, yes.
Salt was as valuable as gold because that's what they used to preserve food, and they use it for seasoning purposes. So
Mm-hmm.
salt, if you learn about the Malan Empire, that's what they sold. Salt. People travel all over from the Arab nations to come to Africa to get salt.
What
It's actually a
about
really good
gold?
book. I mean, gold obviously was that, but for some people, salt was more valuable to them because it meant being able to preserve food and the spices.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes.
So
You were saying there was a
yeah,
good book to read?
Yeah, Patrick Burroughs wrote a book about Liberian culture pre-ACS, and he discussed what drove people into Liberia and how um, salt and a couple of other things was what brought a lot of traders into Liberia. And he kind of drew this culture, I mean, drew this history about what happened prior to the Americo-Liberians coming. And it's very fascinating. And salt was a very important part of that.
Mm, okay. I just put in the comment section basically a page from AfricanHeritage.com. Big shouts to Paul Rock and his crew. It's from Barbados to Liberia, a deep look into the first Barbadian settlement in Liberia if you want more information.
Hey, listen, let me make a connection because you mentioned Paul Cuffey. I was watching a documentary on ODB, and I
Mhm.
found out that he's related to the Cuffey.
No way.
And yeah, and it's funny because I always tell that the members of the Wu-Tang were the Digs. You know, RZA is a Diggs that formed the Wu-Tang Clan, and I always try to make the connection between that family and the history that they had in terms of forming Liberia because they were part of the first wave of people that went.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a funny feeling that it is because one of the brothers is connected to Liberia also, and I know I'm related to the Digs as well. So there are a
Wow.
lot of Digs that are out there. As yeah, of course.
You have any
I mean, like,
Clarks? Are
say that
you
again?
are you familiar with any Clarks by any chance in Liberia?
I know there are Clarks there, but I don't, I don't have any personal connections to them.
Now, you were also saying, I remember a while back that we were able, in Liberia, you guys were able to maintain some of the cultural heritage and legacies, such as language. You said that your father sounds like a pure Bayesian, I think you said?
You know what's funny? Yeah, because what happened is even when I listen to him now, I will hear that, and for me, that was my father growing up. But when I listen to him now, like growing up in New York, I'm able to distinguish the different accents.
Hmm.
So back then, um, I didn't really realize it until I started getting into. Also, I met Bayesians here, and I can say, okay, I see that when he says certain words, and you can hear the Bayesian part of it because Liberian accent is very strong, but at the same time, I can hear the Bayesian part of it too.
That's so cool. So, okay, so the other family members who are descendants of Barbados in Liberia, did they
Mhm.
display any type of a Bayesian language
Not necessarily, not
accent?
necessarily. I
No.
think I'll say it like this, right? Because I do. Okay, when they got into Liberia, they all got categorized into one group, and they
Hmm.
call them the Congos. And they didn't really understand that the Conga is like a class that they identify as people that came from other places. But it was so many different cultures that went there. There were slaves that were captured, midway on the water and then brought into
Yeah.
Liberia.
Hmm.
And then you have people immigrating that was coming from those nations where they immigrated out. So they just bunched everyone into one group. And as so in terms so it's almost like like in America now when people come from other places they become Americans, so they adapt the food and the culture a lot more, even though they had their own sense of sort of discrimination between the indigenous people.
Hmm.
But it was very interesting that um, during that time it's almost like this, right? So if you go America wasn't as developed, so it was almost like a level, because there's parts of Georgia 20 years ago that was like country and bushes and, no roads and anything until the Olympics came. So imagine 150 years earlier what it was in Liberia. So they were able to make the connection into Liberia and assimilate because Barbados wasn't developed, and outside of maybe New York and a couple of other cities, America wasn't developed either. So they were able to easily adapt
Hmm.
into those areas. So when you got there, there was no electricity. There was no
Hmm.
electricity in parts of the United States. There were no roads. So a lot of things were sort of on a even playing field. Whereas now, New York City is very modern, and you go to Liberia, that people still using outhouses
Mm.
And so the gap in the development is a lot more now. But back then, I think it was easier to make the adjustment because 1865 or 1815, you know, you had no technological advancement, so we all were on the same level in
That's
terms of
interesting. That's a
electricity
very,
and running
yeah,
water.
that's a very interesting point. Very interesting point. Because I often wondered the Barbadians, the 346 Barbadians that landed in St. Paul's River, who went on to go to Bensonville, Carysburg, and Coulterville. I always wondered what was it like for them, their first couple of nights. And actually, I understand within the first 10 days of being in Liberia, they built a church called Christ Church
Interesting.
in Coulterville. Yes, yes, because the majority of them were Episcopalians. They were Wesleyans, and I'm bad at pronouncing his name, but Morav. You know what I'm talking about?
The Moravian Church, yeah,
Yes,
Moravian Church. I
Moravians.
know,
Yes, I'm
I've seen
horrible.
that. Yes.
Yeah. So yeah. So those are the three major religious groups that came from Barbados. The Wesleyans were primarily Methodists, but they built a church called Christ Church within the first 10 days. And I also do understand these places, like you said, didn't have any electricity. It was bush. I wondered what it was
That
like
was
when they
easy.
like where would they sleep? What did they sleep on? Did they sleep, outside? Like I'm sure I don't know. I would have loved to know what were their first experiences, at least first 10, 20 days.
What's interesting, a lot of the houses that they built, including where my grandfather lived, had that old style architecture. And if you go to some areas that are in the South, like plantation type houses, I mean, that's what they had. So if you go to parts of Liberia, you still find those old homes that were
Mm.
built a certain way.
Actually, I
And
understand that they brought the Barbadian style architecture of building the houses
Mhm,
to Liberia. So it's like
that's amazing.
so if you go in Bridgetown now, you see those old buildings, or if you see some of the old homes, those old chattel homes, you'll see in Liberia. Those are the homes
Yeah,
that the
that's what I'm saying. So
Barbadians built.
you'll see
Yeah,
the connection there.
yeah.
So my question is, and I will one day do a film about that whole journey because I find it fascinating, willing to risk it all just for freedom
Hello.
and to
Can
be
I?
able to grow up and not being in bondage. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Can I play Florence, please? Which is Arthur's sister, twin sister. Thank you, Florence Barclay.
Yeah.
I want that role.
You
Thank
know
you.
what's
Go ahead.
funny? Remember, and I told you because when we first met each other, you told me about the tomb in the middle of the town in Bridgetown that
Oh
had
yeah, St. Mary's Church. Yes.
exactly. And I always tell people the original Gerald Barclay died at age 5, and he was buried in that tomb. And one of these days, I'll go find my namesake.
Mhm.
My father was Gerald Barclay the second, and I'm Gerald Barclay the third, and then I have a son who's Gerald Barclay the fourth.
Wow.
So it's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting seeing the connection, the family lineage that's there. I think this is going to be the end of the Gerald name. I think we use it enough because my sister's name is Geraldine too.
Oh wow. Okay. No, keep
Yeah.
it going. Keep it going. Keep it going. Any authors?
Well, you know what? There's other, the Padmores. There's a Gerald Padmore, because most of the his daughters married into the Wiles and Padmores, so they
Wow.
became parts of that family too. Yeah, Grimes and so on and so forth. So it was really interesting being able to just finally get a better sense of it. 'Cause when I was younger, like I said, we grew up more as American, and
Mm,
being able to tap into the Bayesian culture. I had a cousin who got married in Barbados, I think last year.
mm.
Faith Barclay. She also they went back, and my trip back is going to be with something that I want to well document. So hopefully we'll be able to
So
really focus on it.
my next question is, so have you been to Carysburg, Bensonville,
Of
these
course.
places, Cordsville? Do the names I just mentioned? Do they still are they still a community, or they have
Yeah,
just
they're still there. As a matter of fact, after the Civil War, there was a huge migration of Liberians that left parts of America to go back. And I actually even documented my father leaving to go back to Liberia because they have been in America, during the Liberian Civil War for, 20 plus years. And I kind of drew a parallel with them going back home rather than staying in the United States. They chose to go back and pick up where, things got left off. They had homes and lands, and they were able to go back and just pick things up. Like my family, they had, my father is in Liberia right now. He went back a few weeks ago. To be able to carry on the tradition. I think the war did a lot of destruction to the country. And as I learned more and more Liberia history, I learned how other hands and forces were involved in the destruction of Liberia. And if you think about how we talked about the fear that people had of educated Black people that were free going back to Africa after being subjugated to racism and discrimination and bondage for hundreds of years, all of a sudden having the freedom to go back. I think there was that fear of, I wonder if they're going to come back and kill us someday. So they made sure they kept a close eye on Liberia, because I think Haiti and Liberia were the first two free nations to become, few places formed by Africans to form, their own nations. And I think they always looked at them and always want to make sure that they keep them at bay.
What about the indigenous population, Congolese and the Liberians? How is that relationship now?
I think after the war, I think a lot of people who maybe prior to the 89 war, wanted to point fingers, and then they realized now, like, hey, I don't care what was happening before, but our country got destroyed. So it affected everyone. So those who embraced sort of the takeover in 80 and eventually the Civil War in 89, a lot of them realized that it ended up hurting the country as a whole. So they, that's why you've had peace for such a long time, because they realized if you have a population of 3 million and then all of a sudden 300,000 people die because of the war, that's 10% of your population right there. So I think Liberians are a peaceful country, so despite the war that went on, which a lot of it was tribal, because people had, animosity for other tribes and they were going after, so it was more tribal versus anything else. Yeah. So now I think they're looking more towards peace. I think that those people who never got a chance to travel outside of the country got a chance to travel to see what it was in America and realize, okay, you know what? I'd rather be there, just because it's not as it was painted out to be. So this great mystery of mostly indigenous people not being able to travel to the United States, being able to come here and then realize, okay, well, in America, you have to work and you may not get anything back and you're never going to be accepted and you're going to always feel like an outsider, except for the small community that you might be in. And you look at the white supremacy that still persists in this country now, and also opportunities that the capitalist system kind of dangles a carrot in front of you, but you end up doing 10 times more trying to get that. So there's a lot of little things that I think that in the long run, people saw. So they have a better scope of it, what it is. And a lot of people choose to go back to Africa because, in America, you may buy a piece of property, but then if you don't pay your taxes, it's gone, and there's always ways that you can lose. Yeah, so you can buy a house or build a house in Liberia and you own it, you have acres.
Listen, I went to Ghana this year and I want to move to West Africa so bad. I do. I want to move to West Africa so bad because the culture, the vibrancy, the food, the music, the language, everything
Oh
is
yeah.
just beautiful. So I
Yeah, my
don't.
wife is from Ghana, and that was one of the few countries that I was able to go to during the war. And when I got there, I just immediately fell in love with it because I saw the similarities
Mm,
in the Ghanaian culture. And a lot of Ghanaians lived in Liberia during the 60s and 70s, so it was a real good connection.
mm,
Um, before being able to go into Liberia in 2004. Once I got back in there, I realized, and I did a really good documentary about my journey back. So we can always get in contact with me if you want to take a look at it.
definitely, definitely. And also,
It's
I
funny.
also. Mhm.
I was saying I have one last piece of sushi left, and it's not. This is not the best sushi at all that I've had. This is, anyways, that's why I stopped eating it earlier. Yeah, it's terrible.
Um, One thing also with regards to Ghana, I understand there's some Fanti as well, that lives in Liberia. So
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
And I think there's the crew tribe. They're also fishermen, so they share that common sort of bond. So the crew tribe, the Fanti tribe, those are in Liberia as well. So those are and they're also you can find them in Ghana, of course.
So who are the? Because I know a number of Barbadian migrants married the some of the women and some of the men too, as well. Who? What are the major ethnic groups? I know there's the Mende, the
Yeah, yeah. So
Gola.
yeah, so the Vai and the Mende, those are the ones that are more indigenous to that area. And we talked about them purchasing the land from Sierra Leone, which is what predominantly are Mende, even though the Mende tribe is in Liberia too, but then you also have the Vai, which is that was kind of like the upper class. So I can see a lot of people assimilating into that tribe. But then you have other people that were with the Bassa tribe, depending on where you settled. I mean, the different tribes had different settlements. I know there's a lot of people that connected with the Bassa tribe.
Talking about
And
settlements, I know I'm trying to find the information because I have everything written down because I want to make sure I have I'm dispensing the right information. But not only did you guys find Coulterville, Bentonville, and Carysburg, you also it seems that the Tulls went to Cape Palmas, the Clarks and the Barclays went to Bassa, Gibsons went to Caldwell, and the Wilds went to Monrovia. So out of all the names that I mentioned earlier, those not only there too, I understand that a good number of migrants went to Gambia, Sierra Leone. You there?
yeah, I'm here. Give me 1 second, or I'm gonna
Sure, go
just
ahead.
pull something. Hold on.
Right. So if you guys have any questions, you can go ahead and ask me. Hey, Arturo, thank you so much for watching. Thank you, Missy Soprano. I see you, Missy, Trisha, everybody, honey, O'Neill, Clive, thank you for logging on. Please feel free to share this video. It touches on Barbadian-Liberian connection that happened in 1865, where you have over 300 people who left Barbados to go to Liberia. And to this day, they are a strong, vibrant community in Liberia. They've not only migrated to the US, but other parts of the world. And like I was just telling Gerald, outside of the Wilds and the Tulls going to various parts like Monrovia and Cape Palmal, I understand that the Clarks and Barclays went to Bassa, but also a good number
Yeah,
of
I
the
was just about
people,
to make the connection. Yeah.
yeah, a good number that left Barbados too also went to Gambia, Sierra Leone, and other parts of West Africa. So we don't only have descendants in Liberia; we have
Liberia.
Barbadian descendants. Technically, if you ask me, once you have African descent, you from Africa. Period. So, but understanding that understanding they have they've been raised in the Bajan culture in Bajan way. I'm looking at a cross fertilization in terms of culture, Barbadian culture now being implanted on the West African landscape. So it's just not Liberia, it's Gambia, Sierra Leone. So whenever you have the Ebola breakouts or anything dealing with Africa, period, but primarily West Africa, my ears and eyes go up because I'm like, okay, we got family out there. Literally, we got family out there. So um, so yeah.
You know what I admire is the fact that you and most of the Bajans that I meet um, have this strong connection with Liberia or just in Africa in general. Like I remember when my many trips to Liberia, to Ghana, and I met some Jamaicans who went back, and there's a direct lineage between Jamaicans and Ghanaians, and that was
Especially
interesting too. So
especially the economy.
exactly, exactly, and I think Rita Marley lived in Liberia, Ghana, and then a couple of other people too. Yeah, and it was a really interesting connection. Just seeing the fact that you guys are interested in that and you're able to. So maybe one day there will be a strong sort of connection between the two places.
Yeah, I would like that because I know definitely this current government is looking to forge. I'm talking about the Mia Mottley government. They're looking to forge or reconnect with some West African countries, not only culturally but trade-wise too. And the reason why, and then one of the reasons why this video is so important to me is because although our independence is right around the corner, which is November 30th, I'm going to keep it so real. I'm going to keep it so real, and my agents know I keep it so real. Having Barbadian parents, for growing up in America, in New York City, in the Bronx. When I lived in Barbados the last 10 years, I didn't feel included in the sense of the independence. Yes, it's about Barbados, but I think sometimes we tend to forget that we have Barbadians that live in different places. You know what I mean? So I just wanted to recognize our Barbadian lineage and Barbadians that live around the world, and they've never forgotten. The mere fact that your father still speaks Bayesian, some can still speak some Bayesian words is testament to that alone. You know what I mean? And
Right.
the mere fact that Barbadians along this migration also brought the breadfruits. I understand to Liberia, whereas before breadfruit wasn't grown in Liberia. So we've also contributed, even though we have African descent, we have contributed a lot in the world, and I just want my Barbadian people to really understand that and recognize that.
Definitely. So it's interesting that you said that because the breadfruit tree is so prevalent in Liberia. I always thought that,
Really?
oh my goodness. And it's so huge. So when it falls from the tree, it leaves. I remember being a kid walking and also seeing how, like trying to avoid stepping on it because once it hits the ground, it leaves like a puddle. So you just brought back some good memories for me.
So I had to ask you
Yeah.
then, since
Mhm.
that's the case, do you have roast breadfruit?
Of course, they do them over there. Like I said, I personally have been out of that country for a very, very long
Okay.
time.
So they
But
do
the
roast
12
breadfruit.
years that I lived there, trust me, every bit of the Americo-Liberian lifestyle and the culture that we shared, I think is there. My grandmother used to take me to all of her society meetings. Um, and took me to Crocierville and all these different places. We grew up in Kakata, not near Kakata in number 7, which was in between. So you have to pass all of those places to go
Mm.
down there. So it's, I think there's an area, Barclay Farm, I think is on the outskirts of the country. And I know that on my father's side, his mother was a Bassa lady as well. So you were right about the connection between the Bassa and the Barclays.
And talking about that, I take it then that Arthur Barclay also he had 4 children by his African wife because he was married twice. The first wife didn't have any children, so then you also have some African, not only Barbadian but also African lineage in you as well.
No, of course.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Definitely. So yeah, the great thing about Liberia, as I said, it was a big melting pot. The fact that when the country was formed, it was formed to embrace black people from all over the world, and I think that's what made it a great place to be. And if you think about it, fast forward into the 60s and 70s, it was like a New York for Africa because at that time, remember, South Africa was still going through apartheid.
Hmm.
And in the United States, they were still lynching people in certain parts. So you have a free nation. There was only a few free countries that you can go to in the world and be black and be proud, and that's what Liberia represented.
Well, I'm gonna let you go shortly, but I just also want to make the point too that Edwin Barclay who is also a relative of Arthur Barclay. Um, I understand. Now, this is what I would like to know. So during the Marcus Garvey movement, it was Edwin Barclay who actually gave the go-ahead for Marcus Garvey to repatriate um, Garveyites from America to Liberia. But what I want to know, I read somewhere the idea didn't come from Marcus Garvey, but came from Edwin Barclay. Do you know anything about that?
It sounds like something that would be is what's interesting about what you talked about earlier about that family having this long lineage, this long tradition of freedom and pushing for that. I wouldn't be surprised. And if he was president at the time, I think the power that he had, was a bit beyond what Garvey probably was doing. So he had the power to bring people into Liberia. And I remember seeing, there's a famous picture of him. I think it was during World War One or World War Two. I'm trying to remember because he was president in the 30s, right? I think he was
Mm-hmm.
president before Talbert.
1930. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. So during that time period, and this is leading up to World War Two, I can see that happening, and I don't, like I said, I don't doubt it. I think these people all had a common spirit back then, which was let's find where we can be free and we can grow and we can prosper. So I don't doubt it, and I'm glad that you
I
brought that
also
up. That's really interesting.
I also realized too that with your great grandfather Arthur Barclay, he offered citizenship, Liberian citizenship, to the indigenous people during the time he was president. And I just want people to know that he served two terms. And it's through him also that the armed forces was created. I think it was called LFF. It was the Liberian Frontier Force. Then became the Armed Forces of Liberia, and that all stemmed from Arthur Barclay, who
Yeah, and
is
there's
a
a
Barbadian.
Barclay. Yeah, there's a Barclay BTC, Barclay Training Center that they have over there. So if you go there, the military base in
Mm,
Liberia is the Barclay Training Center. So you're right.
mm. So I just want to run through the names again for all those watching. So if you guys are related to, and I'm sorry about the pronunciation and my corruption of the pronunciation of these surnames. Skeets, Austin, Devonish, Wiles, Cadogan, Padmore, Nelson, Marshall, Worrell, Earl, Gibson, Denny, Pollard, Bignell, Douglas, King, Thorpe, Hunt, Darrell, Eastman, Holder, Jackman, Cox, Brown, if you're related to the Hines, Cadell, Bourne, Broom, Innes, Tull, Blackett, and actually Blackett, Clive Blackett, you're watching, so you never know.
Might be
Appleway,
related.
Weeks, let's see, Brathwaite, Adamson, Goodrich. I had a professor named Dr. Goodrich, but we called him back Dr. Batteridge sometimes. Francis, Jones, Highland, Taylor, Clark, Thome, the Ports, Graves, MacLean, Forbes, Daldrin, Collar, Gale, Aline, Campbell, Williams, Blackman, Wharton, Moore, Briggs, Simmons, Murray, Lane, Nurse, Jordan, Gittins, Ward, and Armstrong. I will post the surnames in the comment
Please,
section.
you just named damn near the whole country. Every name you've mentioned, I know I can connect with somebody that had that same name.
Wow,
And
and
I
they
know
all.
what's
Mhm.
crazy is there's a lot of Briggs on Staten Island. I wonder if they're connected with that family as well.
So once again, there's a community in Liberia. The Barbadian community still communicate, still talk with each other, marry into each
Yeah, yeah,
other. Wow, that's
yeah.
interesting. Very
Yeah, most of
interesting.
those names that you mentioned actually do. And if you go to Crozierville and Bensonville and those little outskirts of town, you would definitely see those people still there. And
Mhm.
very interesting connection. I didn't realize all of those families came from Barbados. I always thought it was like four or five major families, but I didn't realize like most of the names that you mentioned. That's crazy. Well, you just
And
educated me, girl.
Well, that's my job. And just to give you a little bit more education, I understand that Barbadians were actually the preferred people from the Caribbean because they were seen to be the most intelligent and most industrious. And actually, a letter in 1873 confirmed this, that the Barbadians who came to Liberia were the most intelligent and most industrious. But also, Barbadians had gotten more land than American blacks. They received, I think, couples received 25 acres, while married couples from America received 10. And if you were single, and if you were from Barbados, the Caribbean, you received 10 acres. And then the Black American singles got 5 acres of land. So you guys,
Fascinating.
yeah.
So, all of that sort of led to, and we could probably discuss this because one of the issues that I go through when people find out, oh, your name is Barclay. Remember the guy saying, hey, you're the people who took all our land and so on and so forth. Um, we can't go back and change what happened, but I know there were a lot of wrong that were done to the indigenous people of Liberia, and I'm trying to figure out a way that moving forward we can try to rectify things that were done back then.
Yeah,
And
because
I'm hoping that,
because I understand there was even during that time the indigenous people weren't happy with all these foreigners basically coming and snatching up land and settling and naming places like Bensonville and Coaseville, when it already had its original name and purpose in the first place.
right. So yeah, I mean, if there's a way they can figure out how to correct that, I think it'd be really good to bring peace and sort of begin the healing process because I think that if you look at Liberia now, pre 1980, the animosity was definitely there. But after the war settled and a lot of the people were able to come to the United States and then meet um, the people that they hated so much, but then also intermarry here and then share a lot of more in common with them, because they all, like you mentioned, Ebola, once something is happening to your land, you have that in common. And basically, people were mainly more concerned about, our land, our land of our birth is in danger. So I think now more and more people will understand that and hopefully be able to begin and have already begun the healing process.
It's true. It's true. But one thing I will say, though, I didn't, while reading this and reading the history of this, because I was considering this as a PhD topic, but I've since changed my mind, but the interest still there, is the fact that, for a second there, I was kind of appalled that, Anthony Barclay and his family and the rest would want to go and basically colonize another country. Like their mission was to spread the good word, the Christian word to the indigenous people. They wanted to teach them the civilized way of living. And I'm like, but you're fleeing from an uncivilized place. Why would you want to bring the same elements, same traditions politically and economically into another landscape? And one of the answers that I really came up with is the mere fact is that's all they knew. That's what they knew.
Yeah, and you said it right there. And quite honestly, even looking now, right, and I think the class system was a bigger factor than anything else. And you gotta look and see what was happening then. I mean, there was a time where you can't take pre-civil rights era in the United States or pre-Barack Obama, I mean post-Barack Obama, and it's two different times. People saw things and see things differently, so it's a different time. And
Sure.
as yes, 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 and like I said, I can't correct it, and I think
Yeah.
those people had the many abuses that they went through. I think religion, unfortunately, played a major part because there was this sort of consensus that you're going to go and civilize the savages in the world, and
Yeah.
I think that's probably some of the biggest mistakes that was done in the past. Like they wanted to go and try to civilize these people.
That's true.
You know?
Well, I'm just
So
going to wrap up really quickly. So, just to give a brief historical background, once again, we're talking about the Barbadian Liberians. Barbadians who left in actually on 6th of April, 1865, and landed in Liberia, St. Paul's River, the 10th of May, 1865. There were 333 who boarded, but at the end, 346 disembarked. And they went on to find and settle places like Coulterville, which actually is named after John Coulter and his brother Samuel, because they actually, I think, I'm not sure, I forget. Oh, they were the ones who allowed the $10,000 grant for the trip to happen. So in honor of them, Coulterville, Bentonville, and there's another one, Carriesburg, I think it was, who those are the places that they founded. I just want to make sure I have it correctly. Yeah, Carriesburg, Bentonville, and Coulterville. And others went on to Gambia, modern day Gambia. Others went on to Sierra Leone and other parts of West Africa. And to this day, they still continue. Oh, they still continue, to communicate with one another. And I know there's a lot of Liberians who, with these last names, are looking for their family in Barbados. So if you are a family member in Barbados who's looking to get in contact with, family members over there, feel free to contact me. Although I don't practice genealogy anymore, I'm full researcher now, but I'll still facilitate you and help you. And understand that we're talking to the great grandson of Arthur Barclay, who was a little boy on the boat, the coral boat that left Barbados to Liberia. And he started as a salt seller, became the 15th president of Liberia in 1904 to 1912, and as well you have Edwin Barclay, who was the 19th. I'm not sure, but he was definitely president. See, after 1920, 1930, I tune out. I like more older history, but that's me. Anything
Right.
1930, yeah, I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm not interested. But yeah, I know he was definitely one of the presidents. I'm not sure if he's the 19th or another number. But I know he definitely was in the time of Marcus Garvey in 1930. And one of the things that really interested me was the fact that he was the one who gave the go ahead for African Americans to come back to Liberia, join or repatriate to Liberia or join the Marcus Garvey movement. My question is, who came up with the idea first, whether it was Edwin Barclay or Marcus Garvey? But nonetheless, so like I said, we're talking to the great grandson of Arthur Barclay, who was the 15th president of Liberia. And I just really quickly want you to understand the magnitude of this family and how they helped shape Liberian society politically as well. So they went on to occupy two presidencies, like I said, Arthur and Edwin, 5 Secretary of State, 2 Secretaries of Treasury, 2 Attorney Generals, 2 Postmaster Generals. This is not only the Barclays, the Grimes as well. There are a number of Barbadians who held political office, from the time from 1900s until. I wouldn't be surprised if we still have Barbadians in the government right now in Liberia, Barbadian descendants, I mean. The first Postmaster General of Liberia, which was Arthur Barclay, Secretary of War, George Padmore, and actually when they first landed in Liberia in 1865, there was a civil war, I will call it a civil war in Liberia happening
The
amongst the
Gribble
Gola.
Wars.
Yes, the Gola Wars. The Secretary of oh goodness, forget. Anyway, 2 Secretaries of Education, the Secretary of National Public Health Services, Director of National Planning. You had Barbadians who were Chief Justices of the Supreme Court, Speaker of the House of Representatives, and the first Liberian President of University of Liberia. So that's your
That's
history.
a major accomplishment.
Yes. Now I understand
Major
some of major
accomplishment.
accomplishments. Someone has another major accomplishments amongst all the other major accomplishments he's done in his life. Tell us about your new film.
Oh wow. Uh, but I just did a movie called Fatima's Revenge. It's my second feature narrative film, and
Mm-hmm.
I did about 4 documentaries in between, including The Love of Liberty, which is my Liberian journey back to Liberian documentary that focused on the Liberian Civil War. So that project uh, that I mentioned, Fatima's Revenge, has been released. I'm actually in New York, about to hop on a plane tomorrow to go to Minneapolis to premiere the film. Um, if you want to learn more about it, you can go to thefatimamovie.com, and we'll probably be able to come to your city. We have Minneapolis this weekend. Next weekend, we're in Providence, Rhode Island. And then we're New York City on December 15th. And then finally, we're going to go back to Atlanta and finish off the year. And then hopefully, right when the new year kicks in, we'll start up a whole new tour again with LA, Philly, and possibly DC. And then you'll be able to see it on Netflix and everything else.
Okay. Well, I've seen some of your documentaries and films, and you're an awesome filmmaker. So, yes, I look
Thank you.
forward
Thank
to seeing
you.
Fatima's Revenge on the 15th of December. And I can't
Yes,
believe
yes, yes. I told you, you got to come through, sweetheart.
I can't believe you're actually making me come to Staten Island. But once again,
Yes, that you will discover a huge Liberian community here, and you'll probably run into a lot of the names that you're talking about
so
from
hold on.
Barbados, because a lot of their
So
descendants settled in Staten Island.
okay, I was going to ask you that. Do you know of any in particular that are Liberians that live in Staten Island from Barbadian descent?
Of course, of course. That's what I'm saying. Um, when you come out there, I'll make the connection. But they're definitely the Weeks. You mentioned the Weeks. The Goodridges are plenty out there.
Wow.
Um, the Ports got a Rhode Island, New York connection. And I forgot some of the names that you mentioned. The Gibsons, they're out there.
Mm-hmm.
So there are a whole bunch of families. So there, after the coup in Liberia, a lot of them settled in Rhode Island, definitely Staten Island, and Atlanta is kind of like a new wave of people going there. But Rhode Island, Staten Island has had people since since the 70s.
Mm.
Yeah,
Wow. All right.
yeah. So you have a huge population of Liberians there, and I'll make sure to announce it on the night of so that they can talk to you in the lobby after the film.
No problem. And talk about someone who may know us, Attica Torrance.
Ah,
He is watching.
I just thought, yes, yes, yes. Attica, I would love to get his perspective because Attica is an American born that grew up in Liberia and he, was able. So that's such an interesting connection because he's more Liberian than I am because I left.
Attica?
Um, yeah, Attica grew up in Liberia.
Well, I did not know that. I went to school with Attica. Attica was my boss at LIU TV and gave me hell
Oh
when I
no.
was on my TV
Okay,
show.
well, he would tell you the story because you see, I left when I was very, very young. So I think he either finished high school or, so wherever you are when you go through that stage of your life becomes your homeland, and he grew up
Mhm.
in Liberia.
Oh, wow. Okay, Attica, I'm talking to you next, boo. I got your number still.
Yeah, no, it was very, very interesting seeing, him talking to me about certain things, and it made his kind of life experience very, very interesting.
Mm. Okay. All right. All right. All right. Well, thank you so much. Once again, those in New York City, December 15th, I know for sure, Staten Island, Fatima's Revenge. You want to give information on that?
Oh yeah. Yep. Get more information at thefatimamovie.com. TheFatima movie.com. Tickets are there. You can see the trailer. You can also see read the synopsis because it's a very interesting movie. It deals with life of an immigrant in the era of Trump.
Well, Gerald, you're stuck. Okay. I just want to say thank you so much. And, it's amazing, actually. I can't wait to hug you on the 15th and actually touch some
Yeah, we'll finally
Barbadian
meet. That's amazing.
DNA. Huh? Yes. I've all these
I said
years. We've
we'll
been
finally
talking for
meet.
years.
After all these years,
I
we'll
know.
finally
I
meet.
know. I know. And to think that you are the great grandson of Arthur Barclay, who was the 15th president of Liberia in 1904, who came directly from Barbados. And that is absolutely phenomenal
Rich
for me.
town.
Yes. You need, by the way, I know my Bayesian people gonna want to know when you come to Barbados though.
Oh no, trust me. Hopefully, I'll bring the movie to Barbados. How about that? I'll bring Fatima's Revenge to Barbados.
That could work. And you could also film in Barbados too. Don't forget, I want to be Arthur's twin sister Florence or Sarah Ann Barclay, one or two.
You got that part. Now,
All
just
right,
remember,
babe.
I, I'm a screaming director, so you got to get it right on the
Ah,
first couple of takes.
so you're another Attica then. Fine. I know how to deal with you.
Oh my goodness. I
All right.
appreciate that. No
Thank you
doubt,
so
man. It
much.
was great talking to you, though.
And I need to say thank you to Chad because, after the longest time I've been saying, I need to do this, but Chad Burroughs Gill is the one who's like, Tasha, come. He gave me that little push. So that's why I was like, all right, come, let's do this. That's why I messaged
I
you. So
wonder if Chad is related to Patrick Burroughs, but they came from Jamaica.
mm, you
Yeah,
never
the guy,
know.
the book that I talked about.
You never know. Chad, you never know. All right,
Yeah,
thank
the
you once
connect, the
again.
small world. I appreciate it, sweetheart. Okay.
All right, see you on the 15th. And thanks to everyone who's
Definitely.
watching. Thanks to the Barbados Museum and Historical Society as well as African Heritage Facebook. Thank you for sharing and have a wonderful day. And I'll be every 2 weeks. I want to be able to bring you something historical, not only Barbadian, but also Caribbean and also African American, because I am also American too. I can't forget my American side of me. And so be revolutionary in whatever you do, and just stay tuned for more information about that channel that I'm going to create. And once again, thank you so much, Chad. Bye. Bye, Gerald.
Bye. Mhm.
Bye.
Take care.
All right.